Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part thereof for the 4th of November 2024, so close to the US elections, eh? Right, let us have a look at the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course, and you can find them in the description to the video. We have some fairly high numbers again across the categories, particularly personnel, 1,300 on the nose of the top end of the range that I normally talk about. It's arbitrary, I know, but I talk about very high numbers are 1,000 to 1,300. 1,300 is a really high number, but then of course we've had a couple of weeks of up to almost 1,700. We have had a couple of days previously of above 1,700. It's been very difficult for the Russians in terms of personnel losses recently, but they have access to more people through North Korea, but also I think they are finding things just a little bit difficult. But of course, so are the Ukrainians, and as a result, even as difficult as it is for the Russians, they can still make those territorial gains. 11 tanks being lost is above the daily average. 15 armoured personnel vehicles is a snip under the daily average. 35 artillery systems is almost twice the daily average. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 77 vehicles and fuel tanks, that's very high in that category, and 3 pieces of special equipment. So challenging for the Russians. They continue to be attrited at pretty staggering rates. Okay, War Translated Dmitry says Russian channels have noted that in the battalions and companies, the auxiliary units such as drones and machine gunners are being reduced. The text is long. I went through this in my frontline update, but I thought I'd include it here. The text is long, but to summarise, it's a catastrophic shortage of personnel for meat assaults in the companies, and all the more or less smart guys are hiding in these auxiliary units. However, simply sending everyone into meat assaults is a bad idea, as these units, despite the lack of uniformity, provide some support to the remnants of the suicidal soldiers in the trenches. This could lead to even greater losses. A bit garbled there, I think, in what's being said. At the same time, when discussing the lack of the unified communication system, it's noted that the command posts are consistently operating foreign Starlinks. Okay, so a bunch of different things claimed in there. You can go and check out the original text. The point in general, I think, and I've just watched another testimony from a Russian chap who's an engineer saying, what am I doing thrown into a meat assault? Why was I basically sealed into an MTLB, I think it was, or an IFV, and sent into Kharkiv, I think, direction. You know, I'm a specialist type thing. And we are seeing lots of these anecdotes, lots of these testimonies from Russian troops. That's been going on for some time, but it seems to be an increasing issue. They're sending drone pilots in on meat assaults because they are desperate for soldiers. And that is why I think it's so important that the Russians have received assistance from North Korea. At a time at their greatest need, North Korea has come to their assistance. And this is a massive issue, because had that not happened, you could have got to a situation where the Russian armed forces capitulated in some way. Like, if they didn't have 12,000 troops suddenly assisting them, 12,000 troops, just like that. I mean, think of what percentage of the British Army 12,000 troops is. It's an incredibly large number of people to just get like that. And the Russians have got those 12,000 troops, and that has got them out of a bind. I think they're in a lot of trouble, and now they're in less of a bind. Now, the General Staff have also admitted that over the past day, 3 Russian artillery systems and an operational tactical missile complex were hit. So it'd be interesting to see what missile complex has been hit. Then I reported this yesterday, a second Su-34 fighter bomber down by an F-16, Ukrainian F-16 jet has been claimed. I doubt it personally. I doubt that F-16s are involved in shooting down planes. Certainly at the moment, might have happened. But anyway, the claim was out there yesterday. The Russian mill bloggers reported a mysterious aircraft downing on November the 1st, speculating a Ukrainian F-16 involvement, which is not for the first time recently. And then, as I mentioned yesterday, I couldn't quite make sense of this. A declaration from Yuri Ignat, spokesman for the Air Force. He said, this is the translation, so Mariana Bazulogoya's office writes that the insurgent forces are beating less martyrs through those who form parts of the insurgent forces and not just others, wanted to direct people into hunting. Yes, I confirm direct. There are not many good times, and it's rich, and it's even more painful for the PS from this direction. And of course, it pours into the hidden picture in a chain order. But these are the same solutions. We can cancel them, and you understand why. How can we not manipulate this star's lack of angle? Let me explain why the office of Mariani is breaching. What? I don't really understand it, but Flash News were reporting that that he confirmed the information of People's Deputy Mariana Betsula that now fewer martyrs are being shot down as many soldiers from the Air Force units are being sent into the infantry. And I think, as someone on my thread was saying, yes, I think that means that they are shooting down fewer Russian jets because they are using Air Force personnel to fight in infantry assaults. But if anyone, as I said, if anyone can help me on that, I mean, the Google Translate, what he said is absolute bonkers then there. Right. Again, War Translated here. So simultaneously, a blunt solution to the manpower shortage for assaults is proposed. Simply throw even more money at impoverished Russians, 10 million rubles or $100,000 each, and there will be no shortage of eager recruits. They even openly embrace the term meat assaults. So these are Russian channels recognizing the desperate situation the Russians are in. As this one says, Ramsay thoroughly addresses the problem. Its formal aspect lies in the fact that the unofficial units have proliferated in the army, which has led to the majority of fighters being spread out. And who will go into the good old meat assaults? So interesting that they omit these, the good old meat assaults. These are Russian mill bloggers who are pro-Russian success here. These aren't anti-army people. There's a very pro-army, pro-success. And they are admitting that these are meat assaults that are taking place. So they began to sift through the battalion rosters, returning everyone back to riflemen and machine gunners. I could suggest the simplest way to fill the assault units with people. What is our main motivation for volunteers, aside from serving the motherland? Financial. On every recruitment poster for volunteers, they prominently advertise up to 5.2 million rubles in annual income. So why not offer the assault troops double the regular salary? There will be no shortage of volunteers. It says, one, there is presently a shortage of volunteers. Two, they could just sweeten them, attract them in with huge offers of huge amounts of cash. But of course, they've already been doing that, and they've started cutting some of that monies back. It's possibly because they found a cheaper way of getting troops, which is to get them from North Korea. But again, you start putting all of these bits of the jigsaw together, what Yuri Ignat said, what the other claim from War Translated was that there are issues here with regard to using experts on the front line for these meat assaults. Like I said, I think the Russians were close to being in an awful lot of trouble. I think they still are, but they have been handed a get out of jail free card by the North Koreans, and I think that's absolutely crucial that we as allies come together and actually do something about that to help the Ukrainians in a really freaking significant way, because that is a massively significant assistance to Ukraine that can help perpetuate this war, to keep it prolonged and to keep Russia in the game for potentially an awful long time. I mean, you can imagine a situation where the North Koreans are prepared to give 100,000 troops to the Russians. Distant strikes last night. So Tim White reports that not quite as busy as the previous day for Ukraine's air defense, but still 80 drones. I think that is really busy. 80 drones and a missile were fired. So out of the 80, 50 were shot down, 27 stopped by electronic warfare. So that's 77. That leaves 3 that weren't intercepted in any way, and one presumes hit their targets or near their targets. So 3 drones got through and 1 missile as well. Now, the only place that we do know that there was some explosions, some real issues, was again Odessa last night. As Tim White again says, we knew there were drones heading towards the Danube, and one pro-Russian channel says this is the explosion of Bolgrad, just 3 kilometers from the Moldovan border there. Donetsk was also hit last night. Minohrad is under quite a lot of trouble. Pierre sent me some videos of him in Minohrad. That's just by Pokrovsk. It's almost like a conurbation, and it's just to the northeast of Pokrovsk it would fall before Kursk falls, and the just destruction there, the sound of the munitions in his videos just indicates that it's not a good place to be right now. Kharkiv was also hit, and this has been happening a lot over the last week. I mean, it happens a lot anyway. Tim White getting pretty angry. Yet another explosion in Kharkiv, 3 in an hour. F Joe Biden, why do you allow this? Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, please have some balls. I'm told the USA has already lifted restrictions on Scalp and Storm Shadow missiles. Stop this slaughter. I really don't know what's going on. My opinion has always been, or since Keir Starmer really came into power and said, yep, you got permission to use Storm Shadows, and then he was corrected by his own MOD that said, actually they can't. And I think the most plausible explanation is that the US is holding them back for some reason. Now, some are saying it could be satellite imagery, that in order to, it's okay, you can use the missiles, you can fire them, but in order to actually get the correct targeting in order to use those missiles, you need to use US intelligence, and that's where the issue is. It's the using of US intelligence to do that. Or it could be that they've got components on board, or it's just simply an anti-escalation management tool, so that you can go ahead and use those Storm Shadows and Scouts, but if you do, we won't give you a package of aid from the US. So whatever the reason is, I think the US are behind this, and I do think that France and UK have given permission basically to use those missiles, but not everyone agrees with that. That appears to be where I'm at. And I think when Zelensky says, lists all these countries, I think it's a way of him. He will say sort of UK and Germany on top of the US, but I think that's a way of getting round really just only saying, look, the US, let us do this. It allows him to not be so overtly critical of the US and the US alone, because I think it is the US admin alone that is stopping the use of these missiles. And that's why the UK gets thrown in, but I should think the UK is given permission. Right, the moment the airstrike on a supermarket in Shevchenkivsky district in Kharkiv, currently 11 people are injured. That was as of last night. This, I don't know. I might have shopped at this supermarket. It really does ring a bell. This is what it should. We've got the one. No, if we've got the one where it should look like. Yeah, that's what it should look like. And I just remember that ramp up and going in there. I don't know. I think I've been in there. And that's what it looks like now. Supermarket. Like, why would you be throwing ordnance into that other than just wanton civilian destruction, ergo war crimes? Anyway, Novichokazk, this was yesterday, actually from the night before, but as I've said a number of times recently, we don't quite know what's going on every night. Sometimes things come out, and I think the Ukrainians are hitting a bunch of targets without us really knowing about them often. Here we have a large fire that's burning after Russian air defences, scare quotes, successfully intercepted at least 16 Ukrainian drones. I don't know whether this is a downed drone that has just hit, that has been brought down and hit some kind of random infrastructure, or whether that is somewhere that was purposefully targeted. Anyway, that was in Novichokazk, but not last night, the night before. Okay, on to other bits and pieces now. So a few things to tie together here. So Ukraine has struck the Korean military in the Kursk region for the first time, says Nexta, and indeed Kyiv Independent and other sources as well. The first DPRK military has already come under fire in the Kursk region. The head of the Center of Counter and Disinformation under the Security and National Defense Council of Ukraine, Andrei Kovalenko, has written on Telegram. There is no independent confirmation of this information, but yeah, it could be that the North Koreans have had their baptism of fire over the last 24 hours. Now, on the other hand, it's becoming more and more apparent that the Russians are just doing horrific things in particularly Kherson. I know that Brendan Kelly, who I've interviewed twice working for Tochny, has a new article out on this. He is now taken on a writing job, I think, for Euromaidan Press, which is fantastic. He is really keeping up with the stats and what's going on, as are the Tochny team. And it's really good news that this is getting traction with international press. So there was a documentary filmmaker that also came out with some footage from Kherson. But we have seen the BBC, the Washington Post, a number of outlets talking explicitly about what's being called the human safari. So Russians play human safari in Kherson by hunting civilians with drones, according to the Washington Post. There are increasing reports about deliberate Russian attacks on civilians by small drones carrying grenades and small mines or simply crashing into their targets. Between July and October, 133 people have been killed and over 1,300 injured in this way. I mean, that is phenomenal statistics, as in terrible statistics. Regional Governor Alexander Prokudin sees this as a consistent strategy of Russian forces and called it targeted terrorism. Russian drones often attack ambulances, city buses and civilian cars. They are also covering the city and its surroundings in petrol mines, which explode when touched. They are banned under international agreements, but Russia is not a signatory to them. Local residents, tormented by constant attacks, are forced to leave their homes. One woman decided to run away after she saw a drone hovering over a playground where her 8-year-old son was playing. More often, the story does not have a happy ending for Kherson residents. Alexandra, another local who was evacuated from the region previously, was trying to get her father to move west, but before her plans were realised, her dad died in an explosion while on his way to get water. The Russian army has no limits when it comes to terrorising Ukrainian citizens. This is really horrific, and I mean, it's really great news that the mainstream media have picked up on this. It needs to be highlighted. People need to recognise the horrors that are carried out by the Russian army systematically. And to add to that, Ukraine now tells its medics to remove any markings that might set them apart. If you put a red cross on a car, you'll be fired out within 15 minutes. So that's more, I think, evidence that the emergency services are being targeted. That medical centres, that's on top of medical centres. 1,000, what was the last count? 1,700 medical centres, but I think it's more than that now, have been targeted since the beginning of the war. Sean Pinner, who I've interviewed twice, he is the author of a book, Live, Fight, Survive. He was captured by the Russians and was released in exchange for, was it Medvedchuk? With some other prisoners, Aiden Aslan, etc., etc. Anyway, he says Russia has tweaked its tactics slightly and seems better at using a combination of multiple arms. They are almost certainly launching simultaneous attacks along the front with larger quantities of troops, despite being stretched in manpower and equipment themselves. They have certainly increased their attacks on cities deeper in Ukraine, hitting civilians and civilian infrastructure to put pressure on the government. We seriously need the capacity to deal with Russia's carb glide bombs, the increased use of chemical weapons like riot control agent that Russia incorporates on the front lines, and obviously we need more air defense and drone jammers, or we will eventually be struggling to hold what we have. So a bit of an alarm bell there from Sean. Null Report says Ukraine faces its hardest winter yet. Daily power outages could last from 8 to 20 hours, and Russian attacks on Ukrainian nuclear power plants pose a serious risk. Currently, reactors provide 60% of Ukraine's total electricity, and any strike on the infrastructure supporting these stations could disable them. That is another warning alarm sounded. So here, Grayskull says, Russian news service reports on the perilous state of the Russian railway network, a massive shortage of workers, spares shortages, and predictions are that its degraded state will soon see small railways associated companies go bankrupt. I read through a very long thread from Prune 60 some time back, a few weeks back, and they've actually updated that thread with loads of data to suggest that that trajectory is still ongoing, as in it is looking very bad for the Russian railways. Let's just read through a little bit from the VCHK OGPU. This is quite a commonly cited Telegram channel that writes a lot about the goings on in Russia. So that Telegram channel obtained a recording of the speech of the head of the Russian railways, Belozerov, and to the Central Directorate of Traffic Management at Centre of Branded Transport Services. Belozerov instructs the Deputy Head of the Central Directorate of Traffic Management for Operational Work, Sergei Krokin, to reduce the working fleet of cars to 1.1 million, while even less was proposed, reduce the number of empty cars on the network by 100,000, and decide with the operators how many of whose cars will be sent to storage or will not be collected. After unloading from customers on each route, there is simply nothing left to carry in them. The volume of transportation is constantly decreasing. The situation is a continuation of the difficulties of the Russian railways has been experiencing since the beginning of the SVO. Many employees went to war or transferred to other jobs. Since Russian railways has low salaries, spare parts for locomotives are not arriving due to sanctions. After sending more than 100,000 cars to the sinkhole, small company owners of cars whose business is tied to Russian railways will begin to go bankrupt. So Russian railways is also a monopoly, and it's not seen any decent investment for an awful long time. It's in a lot of trouble. So according to this Telegram channel, at the moment the restriction has been introduced at the level of the ETRAN program, which was originally created for the convenience of operating the car fleet and transferring everything to a digital format. Now ETRAN serves as a lever. All restrictions on the registration of cars lead to total corruption in the management structures of Russian railways. After all, there is no clear information from Russian railways about which cars will go and where they will not. The amounts named at the meeting are also interesting. Belozerov himself emphasizes that 1 million rubles of bonus official is ridiculous money because the structures of Russian railways, Central Directorate Traffic Management together with the Centre of Branded Transport Services decide who will earn and who will stand, and so on and so forth. You get the point. So there's corruption endemic in the system. There are not the spares. There are not the locomotives. Interesting is another claim that we've seen. So there isn't the infrastructure, but then there are also talks about, well, actually grain and coal and all these other industries are suffering. So there's not the loading capacity and potentially not as much stuff to load as well. So you get this double whammy. And it is a reflection of the state of the Russian economy, I think. And it is creaking. And we talk about the price of butter. We talk about, the inflationary pressures on the economy. And then you have the central bank raising interest rates to 21%, and that's looking at like going further in December. It's all looking very challenging for the Russians. Now, I talked about this yesterday. People were rightfully angry about this. Google Maps produced a whole bunch of new mapping just before the weekend, and then that had the sites of loads of Ukrainian military targets effectively. So they were basically saying to Russia, here you go and shoot all this stuff. And the Ukrainian armed forces, Ukrainian government were onto Google saying, what the frick dick are you doing? Come on, sort this out. And Google Maps reveals sensitive Ukrainian military positions on its maps, and Google representatives have initiated discussions. But they've initiated discussions, well, that's good, with Ukrainian authorities after military positions appeared on their mapping service. Ugh. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all of the support you guys give. And I'll speak to you pretty soon.